Welcome to The Mystic and the Skeptic, the show that asks the tough questions and explores different alternatives to today's pressing issues, theories, or enigmas.
It's a podcast devoted to the exploration of all things mystical, philosophical, scientific, political, conspiratorial, and cosmic. Join us in an exploration of the Mystic-Skeptic mind space.
We're your hosts, David and Ryan. Today we will discuss a difficult topic, that of sex trafficking, which is one of the many forms of modern-day slavery. As we delve into this topic, we hope to be sensitive to survivors of any type of abuse. We would like for our show to bring awareness about the human rights violations that are committed in our country and how the many forms of mistreatment affect our society. First of all, human trafficking is defined as a form of modern-day slavery, which involves the exploitation of persons for commercial sex or forced labor. Traffickers use force, fraud, or coercion to control the victims. Exploitation is the act of employing the greatest possible advantage, as well as the utilization of another person or group for selfish purposes such as profit. Our guest today is Rachel Irby, the executive director and founder of the nonprofit organization called Unchained. The Unchained movement was established in 2011 through a collaboration of community members, survivors, and advocates who are committed to abolishing domestic sex trafficking. They just opened their first residential program for 6 sex trafficking survivors, ages 18 to 24. Welcome to our show. Rachel, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been involved in the anti-trafficking movement for going on about 8 years now. I first got involved back in 2008, I believe, in Phoenix, Arizona, where I was offered a position to supervise a residential program for women over the age of 18 who are leading the life of prostitution. And it was in that role that we really started to look at the issue of sex trafficking and realizing that many of these women that were involved in prostitution were actually victims of sex trafficking. So that's where I really started to learn and get my training as far as this issue and how it is affecting women and children all over the country. I supervised, it was a 16-bed, 3 different houses, and we had about 16 beds total, and really started doing work on the streets, working with FBI and Phoenix Vice, working on rescue efforts and doing street outreach. And I would also go into the jails and speak with women there that were trying to get a new start in life. And in that time, I really just started to become more of a authority on the issue and started doing trainings for service providers and professionals so that they can learn how to identify victims and understand what kind of services are needed to help them to overcome the trauma and so on that they've been through. So it was, I did that for 3 years, and then I started Unchained, and like you said, in 2011, and really my heart is after youth and young adults because I've seen so many women in the Dignity program that, you know, one woman in particular was 50 years old and, you know, just leaving the life of prostitution. And when I asked her, you know, how did you get involved in this? And she actually was sex trafficked at age 14, and she was never able to break out of it. And stories like that are just, you know, when you think about a person getting involved in something like this at such a young age, and it becomes their entire life, I really wanted to be a part of trying to stop that cycle earlier in life so that their entire life experience is not that of being abused and experiencing trauma. So with Unchained, I started traveling the country and speaking in multiple states, doing a lot on college campuses and providing trainings for service providers. And then we moved from Phoenix to Tennessee in 2013, so we're going to be approaching our second year out here, and we just opened our first residential home, as you said, for victims ages 18 to 24, and our long-range goal, which is the big end dream, is to start a ranch for teens, which would be for 11 to 18 years of age.
Oh, that's great. What particularly are you guys doing now beyond just setting up these homes for the women? Are you working to? Are you also working to get more awareness towards this issue within Nashville and in the surrounding area?
we consider ourselves to be a national organization. So I still travel and speak. I am definitely involved in awareness. We have not only had myself as far as doing trainings and so on, but we've started to train others to be able to go out in their own communities and to raise awareness, whether it be churches or, businesses, their workplaces, wherever it may be, to be able to raise awareness about the issue. And on top of that, we do have some other events that are, really large events that raise awareness. We have one coming up in January, going to be at the Tennessee State Fairgrounds.
Okay, so you're focusing more on ground level community organization and awareness. It sounds like, the reason I asked that is sometimes these organizations will also try to lobby the governments or Congress or different state governments or county governments to focus on this from a law enforcement standpoint. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like you guys are going more the community route.
We go the community route. We encourage people as part of our presentations to get involved in what's going on, within things politically. I have been up there to the state capitol and talked to a lot of legislators and so on. That is not our main focus, and at least not mine, but there are people within our organization that they've been up there several times advocating on Unchained's behalf.
I see.
So, yeah, I'm more of a hands-on person, more in the education realm. The other thing that we do, though, is we do provide trainings for law enforcement. And we have one police department in the Middle Tennessee area that they're having me come in to train all their officers, and they're also opening it up to other officers within the state. We also have some county officers that will be training here very shortly as well.
Oh wow, that's great. What is your reception been with different government officials or the different police agencies? Have they been receptive to the issue, or do they share your concerns, or what's been the general reception of your efforts?
It's very mixed.
Yeah.
I think that the problem with human trafficking, or in particular sex trafficking, is that people get confused between prostitution and sex trafficking. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to law enforcement in particular, there are some individuals that believe that this is truly a victimless crime. Mm-hmm. We hear stories, and I've heard this directly from even a law enforcement officer, that they will, in some cases, when they find a prostitute who is dead, they will label her as a NHI, which stands for no human involved. That they don't even look at these individuals as humans. Mm-hmm. So that has been a hurdle, and we have in each department there are champions for the cause, and then there are people that just really don't care. And that's always the that's always the challenge that we face is on that education level. I did have a police officer say one time, why don't we just lower the age of consent for sex so we don't have to deal with this?
So it seems like they make those,
disturbing.
they make those designations to maybe cover up how prevalent of a problem it is. That's it's kind of like
I said. Then you have the other side, where you do have people that do champion it. I mean, I couldn't do my job without law enforcement, especially those that truly understand the issue. And we had a law enforcement. We had two officers from a precinct out in Phoenix that they approached us and they said, you know what, we want to understand this issue, because after we ended up talking with them and really educating them about this issue, they said to us, and I quote, we have been misdiagnosing so many cases for so long, and they've been missing their opportunities to be able to help victims because they've seen them in something else. Mm-hmm. So that's the challenge, and once that light bulb goes off, then, that's amazing, but it takes a while to get there.
Mm-hmm. As cities get larger and larger, a lot of people seem to fall through the cracks. They're alienated in these large cities. They may not have family support or community support, and really, for a lot of people, especially with the women that you're dealing with, the only support is organizations like yours. and Unchained, and so I mean that's good that they have those outlets, but there it just seems like even with your organizations, there's still a lot of people who fall through the cracks and get caught up in all kinds of crazy things, sex trafficking, drug trafficking, all kinds of different shady black market type criminal enterprises, and
and that's exactly what you were saying. I mean, this is a crime. This is criminal activity, which means that usually there's not crime committed unless there's somebody who's risking a benefit from it. You know, and in the sex trafficking, it's extremely lucrative. There's a lot of money to be made. And unfortunately, the penalties are not as strong as what they should be towards really destroying another individual's life. And there are programs out there that exist, but there's not enough. Otherwise, we wouldn't have women that are in their 40s and 50s, you know, that are just, you know, they're caught in this cycle because so many of our programs that we have are not built to truly meet the needs that are so complex that our victims experience. So yeah, I mean, it's a horrible crime, and it's going to keep going until, you know, society really embraces, you know, that this is a true issue, and that there are, you know, people that are falling prey to these monsters.
So this is something that affects all populations, correct? When I worked at the Houston Area Women's Center, they asked me, you know, people who are sexually assaulted or have domestic violence, they experience domestic violence. They asked me, you know, what group of people, you know, has that happen more, and it depended on the week. Sometimes we have affluent people, sometimes we have people in poverty, sometimes we have all, you know, white survivors or all black, all Hispanic. So is it the same with sex trafficking, where people in any community can be lured into or coerced to be prostituted by force?
Yeah, you know, I would say that times that we're seeing a shift in this, where before, probably 15 years ago, you're going to primarily see individuals who have come from rough home lives, individuals that might be of color being more affected by this. And, you know, you would see people, you know, it's kind of that mentality of it only happens on the other side of the tracks. And I think that it probably was majority more like that 15 years ago, but something has changed in our culture that has really changed the landscape, and that is the internet. Because of the internet, we are seeing girls and young boys from all walks of life getting lured into this. The internet has become the biggest track, which is a known place for prostitution, has become the biggest track and one of the biggest vehicles for sex trafficking. So social media is a big one that's bringing, you know, young girls, luring them in. You know, Facebook and actually just most recently, I just spoke with a couple who their 13-year-old daughter was on Instagram and was being solicited by a pimp. The FBI had to get involved in that case, and they tracked this guy's cell phone down to a port in California where they believed that she was going to be sold overseas.
Wow.
You know, this came from, you know, a middle class to upper middle class family, this young girl over Instagram of all things. So the landscape has changed. It used to be, you know, to find a quote unquote prostitute, you would have to, you know, go to a seedy area of town, and you kind of know what areas, you know, those women would work or girls would work. And it's not like that anymore. It is on the internet. It's very accessible.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's crazy, like how many girls are seen from good influential families, you know, all races getting lured into this.
Yeah, it's you make a good point about the impact of the internet. It makes it in a lot of ways it makes it from the person who's taking advantage of these people and who's paying for these services or whatever you want to, however you want to describe it. It's basically it has a weird way of legitimizing it to the person who's doing it, who's I know that weird. It sounds weird to say, but from the person who's calling these places to get these services and paying for them, going to the internet and doing it opens it up to a whole broad range of people that normally would not be comfortable with going into these seating areas. So it spreads, it spreads it that way, and there's a psychological impact of being able to make this a simple call or a simple email on the internet, and then a couple days later you're there. So that's
not even a couple days later.
I mean, it could be
like 20 minutes.
Yeah, that's nuts.
20 minutes you're there.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
Another fact, according to the Article 4 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, no one shall be held in slavery or servitude. Slavery and the slave trade shall be prohibited in all their forms. In Article 6, everyone has the right to recognition everywhere as a person before the law. Would you say the difference between like ancient slavery and modern day slavery is that now people are disposable? Like the reason they're going after young ladies and boys is because they can extract whatever they need from them and then toss them and get a new one. And it's just this endless cycle of taking advantage of younger and younger victims and moving on to the next place to hurt someone else. So is that what is happening, that people are becoming disposable?
Disposable, yes, but I want to bring a point as to why sex trafficking is so lucrative and so appealing to gangs, and is because it not only is a person disposable, but they're reusable. Meaning that if I am selling a weapon or if I'm selling a gun, I sell that product, that product's gone. I have to go get more of that product. But with a person, you can sell them over and over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
So disposable in the long run, yes, but honestly, reusable is where the money is for these individuals.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the life expectancy of a teenager who gets involved in sex trafficking to only be 7 years.
Wow.
If you go back to ancient times, when you're talking about, that, we see all the way back, even in biblical, times, like New Testament times, where the Romans had sex slaves, and these women were servicing the military men, and they were getting involved, at age 11, and their life expectancy was 3 years back then. I mean, it's still kind of the same idea.
Mm-hmm.
But life expectancy in today's society, 7 years once you start to be, trafficked. So, I mean, somebody could get involved at age 12 and be dead by age 19. They haven't even lived their life yet.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I would say reusable more than disposable.
And another fact about sex trafficking, according to the U.S. State Department, 600,000 to 800 people are trafficked across international borders every year, of which 80% are female and half are children. Do you agree with some academics that say that there's not enough reliable studies or analytic documents on trafficking due to it being underground? Is that one of the issues that is happening, that is hard to pinpoint and find the resources because it's hard to know how many people are being trafficked at this time?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with that, and probably others in the anti-trafficking community would be upset with me by saying that, but I just want to be honest. I mean, this is so underground, especially the boys is even more underground than the girls. It is so underground, and so many girls will not actually admit that they had been victimized.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of shame and guilt involved in this. Even though it wasn't their fault, there's still that feeling that they're going to be judged by society, And so they won't come forward, and they won't self-identify. We see that all the time. So it's truly hard to get a handle on it. I think we try to get some statistics within the United States, within, the domestic cases. We look at like the runaway rates, and we do see, how often a child is declared missing. It is true that a lot of these children, in my belief, that do end up missing are being brought into sex trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
I do believe that, and because I've heard the stories of the girls, that talk about it. But yeah, it's difficult to get solid statistics, and so I love when there's a really great Arizona State University. They're really working hard to get more reliable statistics. Shared Hope International, trying to get those more reliable, statistics. But I think there's a lot of sensationalizing too. We say around Super Bowl time that there's like 100,000 teams are being brought in at that area. That's probably not accurate. Do we need to give it that large of a number to try to make it sound like it's it's a horrendous crime. It's a horrendous crime. And do we see an influctuation? Yeah, I've talked to girls that their pimps and traffickers made them go to, those kinds of sporting events. Yeah, that happened. 100,000 is a bit much.
Yeah.
I would like to see research to back that up. But the fact of the matter is, it is happening. It is happening. Yeah. And, there needs to be more research done. But it's hard to do research on something that's that underground, or when you don't have victims that want to self-identify.
Mm-hmm. One thing that comes to mind with talking about this is the underground aspect of it, which you had mentioned numerous times, and the fact that family members can be involved as well. I have some thoughts as to why it's underground. This might be take on kind of a conspiratorial tone, but I practiced criminal law in Omaha, Nebraska for 5 years, and I had numerous situations where I was able to help out my clients based on information that they had. And on a few occasions, people had information with respect to different sex trafficking or massage parlors or these types of things within Omaha. And I had a number of very weird things happen when I brought this up to law enforcement officials, particularly the investigators. On every single occasion where I had shared this information with them in the hopes of getting a better deal for my client, very quickly afterwards, I heard in the news that that these not the news, but I heard through the grapevine that these places had all of a sudden closed up, and I was thinking, how is that possible for, like, with me a few days prior speaking with these investigators, and then like a week later I hear through the grapevine that the thing's closed. And to me, it seemed like there was a lot of people involved in law enforcement and government that were using these services and who had a vested interest in not bringing it up. Now, I don't think that that's probably a lot of people within law enforcement or government, but I think it's enough that they're either getting paid because of the like you had said, a lot of revenues that are coming in through these services. They're getting paid from these people to kind of keep it on the down low and to cover it up, or they're using it. They're using these women and these victims for their own purposes. And so that might be a bit too conspiratorial, but just my experiences led me to believe that that's something that might be going on. And in Omaha, I don't know if you know that much about Omaha, but in Omaha, Nebraska, there was a rather big scandal there back in, I think it was the mid-'90s, maybe the early '90s, where it came out that a number of high-level officials within the county government, within the city government, were basically running or taking part in a sex trafficking thing. And so it seems like that when it comes to actually enforcing these laws and tracking these people down, which I think is probably pretty possible with the internet technology that we have and the tracking capabilities that we have. But there seems to be somewhat of an effort to keep it underground because there are a lot of people within government that are benefiting from it. And I don't think it's just sex trafficking. I think it's also drug prohibition and drug trafficking as well, where you have a system that where it's benefiting those in power, and so they have the incentive to keep it going and to keep it underground. Have you run into anything like that in your years, or anything to suggest that there might be active elements within law enforcement or other areas of the law to keep this underground?
Well, I mean, I don't want to speak too negatively about law enforcement just because it's impossible to do what I do without them. Mm-hmm. At the same time, we do know, publicly know of cases where there's a police officer in Memphis, Tennessee, police by day, pimp by night, possibilities from other officers being involved in that. We know that law enforcement on some level can be a facilitator, by either them being able to benefit, as you said, from the girls, or receive money on the side to allow it to happen maybe in a neighborhood that they patrol. Yeah, we know that there's crooked cops. We know that. On the political end of things, we know that there have been people in power who have solicited these young girls. We know that. And unfortunately, it's the people that have the most money that can buy the most protection and secrecy for themselves, for a period of time, at least. Not necessarily forever. Or the military. I'll tell you what, there is so much. I have spoke with a woman who used to, and this is public, you can look it up, I believe, on Good Morning America, or where she was speaking about how she was being forced by her commanders to be involved in sex trafficking for the other, for those in leadership in the military. So is that happening? Yeah, it's happening. How on what scale it's happening, I'm not sure. I have no idea. I'm going to hope. I try to be an optimist as much. I'm going to hope it's a small percentage. I think that most people that get into public service, as far as on law enforcement side, really do want to do good. But I think that there's a percentage, as we know, that are dirty cops or politicians. We know of politicians that are doing things that they shouldn't be doing. We know that.
Yeah.
Another fact about sex trafficking is that under U.S. law, minors exploited in prostitution are considered victims of human trafficking. In many instances, brothels are disguised as acupuncture clinics, health spas, and massage parlors. So where does Nashville rank in modern-day slavery and sex trafficking? I know Houston was a couple of years back was the number one place because of people coming from different countries. But what about Nashville?
Well, I'm just going to be really honest with you. I don't know what Nashville is. I can tell you that almost every city that I speak with, like I meet somebody from a different city, they'll say, "Oh, we're like number one," or like we're in the top 10. Almost every city I talk to. I know that Atlanta is supposed to be number one in the nation. I've heard that repeatedly, saying that Atlanta is like the hub right now. When I was in Phoenix, I heard Phoenix was in the top, 2, 3. I've heard about Houston. I've heard about New York. I've heard, just yesterday somebody told me Wichita, Kansas was in the top 10. So I honestly, I don't know. There's a lot of cities that say that they're one of the top, and Oklahoma City I heard just a couple other days ago. So I'm not sure. I just know that it's in every city around the United States, in every community, whether it's small or large. And in your bigger cities, you're going to have even more of it because there's just more people involved in those bigger cities. So I can tell you in Tennessee, on average, we have about 100 teens that are being trafficked every month. That's a study done by the TBI, and it was an extensive study done by the TBI, speaking with other law enforcement agencies. And I can tell you by talking with some of the even smaller policing communities that they've said, we're experiencing issues of trafficking, and what we're seeing are parents trafficking their own children.
Mm-hmm.
So it's, and I'm not saying Houston isn't one of the number one. I'm working with a victim right now out of that area. It's happening everywhere, and in Houston, it makes sense Houston would be up there. It would make sense that Nashville would be up here too, just because of our proximity to Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
But it's happening in every community, and I just want people to know that please don't think this is just a big city issue. It's happening in small communities too. I was speaking in a very rural community to a group of probation kids who are on probation, and I'm talking about this issue of trafficking, and this girl says, "Oh, I know this guy that's doing this to some girls in our neighborhood." This is in a rural community,
mm-hmm.
and she identified somebody, and I had to say to that sheriff, like, "Did you hear that? You need to talk to this person and get information on it."
Mm-hmm.
So it's happening everywhere, and unfortunately, as Americans, we would rather stick our head in the sand and just say that's not happening around here, and that's happening overseas. And most of our money that is being donated towards these causes are going overseas because it's just easier to stomach that it would be going on in a third world country,
mm-hmm.
not here in America. But it is, and America is a part of huge pornography, production, which is also contributing to sex trafficking, and it's happening in strip clubs. People want to normalize it, and bachelor parties and all that going on in strip clubs.
Mm-hmm.
Sex trafficking is happening in strip clubs. I have met a girl who started working in the strip clubs at 16. I have heard of a girl working in a strip club at age 13. It's happening in these clubs. So it's happening on so many levels, and we need to start being aware of it. And we need to adjust our moral compasses, too, and start to say that, if I'm purchasing sex from someone, maybe I need to look at something in my own life and
yes.
and makes, there's a study out of Arizona State University that says 1 in 4 men are purchasers of sex or have been purchasers of sex.
Mm-hmm.
1 in 4. Even if that statistic was 1 in 10, that is horrible in our society.
Yeah, that's insane. It doesn't surprise me though, because of our society and our culture. We have this idea of moral relativism and kind of a hedonistic approach to life because of our abundance that we have within this country, and also the way that the culture has portrayed women within our society and our culture. It's very disrespectful, and it has been for a long time. And so for these men, and this sounds crazy, but for these men, it's not seen as a big deal. Right. And it's nuts to think that, but it's the common myth is that these women love it, or that they chose this lifestyle or whatever else, and that's enough for these guys to justify it to themselves. And it's nuts, really, how messed up that is, and it's so deep within our culture, and it also has a lot to do with the emotional and spiritual issues that these the people that are purchasing sex for money, what they've been through, what their life's been like, and so it's nuts, and I think one of the reasons why it's ignored in our society and our culture is that even when you hear this, or when people hear this, because it's associated with sex, it takes on a different form, and people don't want to pay attention to it because it's so wrong and so horrendous. and so they want to put it out of their minds. They don't want to think about it, and I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that there's just this basic disrespect for women, and so it's just kind of just pushed under the rug, and it's not a big deal, or this idea that it's not as prevalent as the people who work in it know that it is, and also we had the laws against it, but it doesn't seem that there's any real enforcement of it, and I think that also stems from this basic lack of respect for ourselves and for women, and the fact that it's associated with sex does a whole entire it takes it out of it takes it into a different realm because it's involved with sex, and that really distorts the response to it, I think.
Right. Yeah. Well, and the other thing is that people don't understand the violence that comes with this life. So pornography, unfortunately, again, the internet has increased, its accessibility to pornography. It's free, it's online, it's at a click of the button, it's on demand whenever you want it. And a lot of pornography is portraying very violent and rough and degrading sex acts with women. And so what we're seeing is that the men, and you know what, I will say I'm not someone that hates on men, but this is almost exclusively an issue with men as being buyers. Mm-hmm. Almost exclusively. And what we're seeing is that these men will go to prostitutes to do the things that they're seeing online in pornography that their wives and their girlfriends would never in a million years do with them. And because of that, they're going to them, and it's this mentality of, well, if I'm purchasing it, I can have sex however I want it, I can have it how rough I want it, and I can do whatever I want to this person. And actually, I don't even see him as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And so these women experience, when you talk about the aftermath of what happens, to them, we've had girls, and this is gross and it's graphic, but we've had girls that have to have surgery because they can't even hold their bowels in anymore because men have had such rough anal sex with them.
Jeez.
And that is, that's the kind of stuff that is happening, and there's just no regard whatsoever to women as people. They really view these prostitutes as just trash.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's sad. It's I think it when you go deep down, it relates to a lack of respect for yourself and lack of respect for others. That's what it really boils down to. And yeah, it's interesting that, like what you had said with respect to prostitution, or not prostitution, but pornography influencing this practice, and that's the first I'd ever heard that was something that's occurring. But it makes sense that would be the case. That's disturbing, to say the least.
Yeah.
Rachel, do you think that in movies there's been also kind of an exploitation of women? Not only the movies that are meant to be exploitative, but lately there's been movies about human trafficking. I know the first Taken movie dealt with that in a very superficial way, but there was 2 movies that came out in the last years about human trafficking, and they were meant to bring awareness. One was called Trade, and the other one's called Slevana's Journey. And I was actually pretty disturbed by those movies because in the hope of trying to bring awareness, they were very raw and very exploitative of the situation. Like, I know in Trade they show little girls being kidnapped. One of them gets run over by a car. She's being chased by the traffickers. Another one jumps off of a cliff and staying away from them. In Slevana's Journey, they show this young actress playing a 13-year-old who was sold into slavery by her parents, and they show pretty much everything other than the rape. And to me, I'm like, aren't you supposed to be trying to give dignity to the women who have experienced this, why showing it in a graphic way is going to help people stop this? So I'm just afraid that at times people pretty much do what the culture is doing, and in the hope of trying to bring awareness, they're still exploiting the actresses and not really addressing it with the sensitivity that such an issue should be dealt with.
I see what you're saying there, but I will tell you, I've seen Trade. I haven't seen the other one that you mentioned. Trade was the first movie I've ever seen about human trafficking. It was the first movie, and I saw that when I first started working at Dignity, and they used it, as a way for me to, to have my eyes opened about the issue. And I walked away from that movie angry. I walked away just realizing how heinous of a crime this is, and I really felt there is no greater crime against a woman than that, and or boy. So honestly, that movie did its job for me. It actually made me even more passionate about this cause. I can tell you that, unfortunately, in our society, we've become so jaded to things that if you have a movie that doesn't, and I'm not saying that it's right to do it, I'm just saying that people want exposure to like the grittiness. Even when we have survivors tell their story, or we have, it's amazing to me, we'll have volunteers or people who want to volunteer and they say, I just want to sit and listen to the girls' stories. Well, why do you think you've earned that right to hear that? We want to hear though. It's like our human nature is like we want to see the grittiness. We want to hear the war stories because that's what moves people into action. We've done a couple of awareness videos, very short ones, and I'm always very concerned about, okay, I don't want to cross the line here. I don't want to cross the line and, because these are like young girls that are, acting, and I don't want to exploit them, and usually they're telling me that I'm being too protective over them, and that they understand that it's acting. I thought Trade was an excellent movie, but it was pretty raw at times. But you know what? That's pretty real for what a lot of these girls go through. So I don't know. I mean, I didn't see the other movie, so it's hard for me to mention on that one. But Trade, it really got me passionate about the issue. It really did.
Okay, one last question. What would you say to people who consider the involvement of churches and religious organizations a little concerning in the human trafficking, sex trafficking intervention? One of the fears is that proselytizing might be one of the reasons they're helping the survivors, which could get in the way of them receiving the resources they need, especially after being traumatized. I know that the trauma of being exploited can affect the brain and the behavior of the survivors, so being exposed to any type of evangelizing or religious outreach at a time of coming out from the trauma seems a little inappropriate. Do you think that the churches are sensitive to not do that and kind of give them their space and let them heal from their trauma, even though they're coming from a religious perspective?
Well, let me just tell you my background. I actually was a youth pastor for several years, and my background has been in ministry and so on. My view is that I've seen churches, or I've seen ministry organizations to where they'll say, our program is faith-based, and that means the girls will participate in Bible studies and will participate in this, that, and the other. We don't do that in our program. I mean, and I come from the position that these girls, I don't want to push an agenda on them because they have been abused by the churches, by the way. The churches have been part of the issue with their view to them by calling these girls sinners and everything else. The church has been part of the problem, and let's be honest, some of them that if 1 in 4 men are purchasers of sex, that means there's men within those congregations that are also purchasing girls. And these girls that have been through this, they see the wedding rings. They see the men wearing the crosses. They hear about that these men are pastors. So they're reluctant, and they're really hesitant, and they're not trusting when it comes to that. Now, I will say that in the long run, we look at things from what are the resources that are going to help a girl to come out of sex trafficking or just overcome, these traumatic situations. There's a book by Ruby Payne called A Framework to Understanding Poverty. She talks about 7 resources that people need to come out of poverty. And I'm not talking about the financial side of things. I'm talking about just the mentality and that socioeconomic class of poverty. And she talks about, you need to have good role models. You need to have, understanding of finances and being able to be financially secure. You need to have good health. And she goes through all these different 7 things that people need. And one of them is spiritual. And when people have something that they can say, that they feel like they have a purpose in life and that they feel, on a spiritual level that they connect someplace, there is a greater amount of success a lot of times to that. That being said, it's not something that can be pushed. It's not something that right out the gate. I don't agree with a lot of ministries that go out on the streets and tell these, girls like Jesus loves you and, trying to push. I mean, they don't understand that. They don't understand that. We need to meet the needs first of people before we start pushing any kind of agenda. And honestly, when we have girls come in our program, and I've told my volunteers this, if you're here to evangelize, then you're in the wrong spot. We are not an evangelism team. That's not what we're here to do. It's coming from a youth pastor, which, by the way, is somewhat controversial. I'm sure some of the churches don't agree with me. But we're not here to do that. We're here to meet their needs. And then we can create opportunities to where if they want to explore that, then we're more than happy to do that. But we're going to have girls come in our program that come from all different faith backgrounds. I worked with a girl who was Muslim. I worked with a girl who was Jewish. I worked with plenty of girls who are atheists. And we're going to respect that. We're going to respect them, for who they are, and we're going to walk side by side with them, and we're going to help them through this. So that's kind of my stance on it. I think that spirituality and evangelism has its place, but not at the beginning of these girls' recovery. I would say that it probably isn't appropriate.
I respect that approach, and I agree with it very, very much. It's best to take care of the person first and give them the avenues towards spirituality if that's something they're interested in, instead of forcing it upon them. The last thing that these women need is somebody evangelizing to them. I understand the passion of people that do that, but I respect your guys' approach to that, and I think it's probably the most effective in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and it's something. I mean, we have several church partners. You could all website, you'll see we have different church partners. Mm-hmm. And we tell them that. We say that we're not here trying to, convert these girls over to Christ. Like, we're here to love these girls where they are. Mm-hmm. And then if they want to explore that, we are more than happy to go that route with them. We don't force that on anybody. I can tell you, as a youth pastor, when I had kids in my youth group, I had kids that came from all different groups. I had the, Catholic kids. I had the Baptist kids. I had the atheist kids. I had the Mormon kids. I had all these different groups. And the understanding was, we're going to respect you if you respect us. And we created an environment where kids could come and talk about God without feeling judged, without feeling, any of that. And that's what we want, is we just want to create opportunities where people can explore. This time period, that first year is very critical in them discovering who they are. Because while they've been under a trafficker control, they have no idea who they are.
Mm-hmm.
Because if the trafficker tells them to jump, their response is how high. And if, he likes something, well, then she has to like that too. She doesn't know who she is inside. And that's what we're trying to help them do, is help them, discover that in the time that they're with us. So, yeah, it can be controversial when it comes to, different approaches that ministries have. And I'm sure I'll get some, kickback from this, but that's what I found.
Before we go, Rachel, can you tell us a little bit about your residential program? A lot of people might not be aware of how women's shelters work, and is it a shelter? Is it you said something more of like an open area? I know you mentioned wanting to have a ranch available for people to experience healing and receive counseling. So at this time, what does your organization offer to these survivors?
Right. So at this time, our residential program, we have 6 beds for the 18 to 24-year-olds. It's a 1-year residential. They can come in. They can have, it's very structured, I will say. First 30 days, they're not even allowed to work. We're just trying to get them stabilized. And also trying to get, a lot of times they don't have IDs. They don't have any kind of documentation because traffickers will take that as a way of control. So we're trying to obtain those items. We're trying to help them with job preparation, and they will get counseling, the addiction recovery if they need it, basic life skills.